Welcome to the Piedmont Triad Podcast.
Before I get too old, I'm gonna head down to Muscle Shoals. Baby, you can meet me at the station.
Welcome to another episode of the Piedmont Triad Podcast, the only podcast that talks about the strange and unusual things in the Piedmont Triad area of North Carolina. I'm your host, David Locklear, and on this episode, we are talking with Sanna Festa, founder of the Greensboro Near Death Experience group. Sanna created the Greensboro Near Death Experience group as a welcoming environment not only for people who have had a personal near-death experience, but for anyone who would just like to learn more about this surprisingly common phenomenon. And on this episode, Sanna Festa explains the differences between near-death experiences, a shared death experience, and a spiritually transformative experience. Also, what it was like for her to have a shared death experience when a close family member passed away, and how she has seen some of these near-death experiences both strengthen and rattle people who have seen the light.
We're a new group, but we just kind of went with the Greensboro Near Death Experience group. It just kind of makes it simple. Near Death Experience group.
Okay. Now, what do you guys do in this group? Is it like a support group for people who have had near-death experiences to, share their experience?
Yeah, right. So it kind of serves two functions because we're kind of starting out, and so we had to decide at our first meeting, and that was a couple months ago, what sort of the main goal was going to be. And since I started the group, I did say, I'd like it to be a support group, but at the same time, you don't always get stories. This doesn't happen every day. It's not something that necessarily when we have a meeting that someone even wants to talk about. In many cases, the processing takes many years after an experience. And so sometimes they just want to go and hear other people's stories. Sometimes they're not comfortable answering questions about it. Sometimes people are just interested in the general public and they don't have a story, but they are super interested. And so kind of we figured out at that first meeting that we would prioritize anyone who needs to tell their story and kind of go from there. And then I always have backup educational things that we can do. So that's kind of how it worked this week is we arrived I was just there on, Monday night, and we arrived and I just kind of quickly take a poll, around the room. Does anybody have an experience that they would like to share tonight? And we actually had 3 people. So we got through everyone's experiences. And then when we were done, I went straight into a little talk that I had prepared about a book called After by Dr. Bruce Grayson from the University of Virginia. And it talks about the commonalities of near-death experiences after 40 years of research.
Oh, okay. So what are some of the commonalities that he found in that book?
Oh, wow. They're wide-ranging. They can be brought, I actually have the list somewhere with me. They can be kind of boiled down to psychological effects, and that would include things like after effects are one. That's a commonality. Most people who have a near-death experience tend to have after effects. 3/4 of people who have near-death experiences claim to see a light being or a being of light. Mm-hmm. I do know that 10% of cardiac arrest patients have NTEs. They may not report them, but they don't always report them. And he did kind of go into detail in the book about how it's a little bit like pulling teeth sometimes to get it out of people because it just flies in the face of everything and it changes your worldview. It changes how you view your own religion or faith or whatnot. And so it sort of doesn't fit neatly into anything you've been taught. There's a lot of other commonalities, not just sort of the psychological aspects, but some physiological things. Mm-hmm. There are some people who actually have, now this is not very common, but there's some people who have like say electrical things happen after they have an experience where they tend to affect electrical things around them. Like
Really?
usually like light bulbs burning out or smartwatch not working or something. So there's that. But I mean, commonalities, most people say they see the tunnel. Most people say they see a light at the end of the tunnel. Most people have a positive experience that includes feelings of love, and most most people. Let's see, there were a few more. I'm just trying to rack my brain here.
It sounds like it's the more things, and there are more things in heaven and earth than dreamt of in your philosophy is sort of where that kind of steers into.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, the classic near-death experience, we had one this Monday. It kind of goes like this. You know, you're in a near-death situation in most cases, although that is not a requirement for having a near-death experience. In my case, I was perfectly healthy. I had a shared death experience. But you're typically, most people are near actual death. They black out. All pain vanishes, and this is exactly what we were told the other day. There was someone who shared their experience, and it was like classic. Mm-hmm. And they see a tunnel. They see a light at the end of the tunnel. They go towards it, and when they got to the end, they saw 3 family members that had been deceased. And then when they arrived, they were told, and this is extremely common as well, it's not your time. Now, obviously, that's extremely common because the people who come back did not truly die. So, I figure if you actually die, they're not sending you back. So, anyhow, they arrive, they get sent back, and usually, in many cases, they can feel themselves entering their body again, which is really crazy.
Oh, I can't even imagine what that feels like. Couldn't I?
No, I can't either. Yeah, exactly. And then in many cases, people have out-of-body experiences. That's really not all that uncommon. Mm-hmm. I think the shared death experience that I had, it's probably more common than people realize, but I have not for my life, and I certainly couldn't locate it in the book. I could not find a statistic about prevalence. Mm-hmm. So I think it's something that it's a problem studying near-death experiences in general because, the group of people out there who tend to be religious, well, it doesn't fit the narrative specifically, and if you read the experiences, people are not 100% sure in every case that it was their religious upbringing. Mm-hmm. In many cases, people will see beings and they don't know if they're angels or not, so it can have that effect of kind of maybe just sort of surprising people who had preconceived ideas about religion. And then on the other hand, people who are more scientifically minded, not that you can't be both, but mm-hmm. for people who are scientifically minded, oftentimes this is a little hard to accept because there's no proof. It's all anecdotal accounts. And so we like to, as humans, have some kind of proof. And I certainly fell into that boat mm-hmm. when I was before my experience. I certainly didn't think any of this was possible until it happened to me.
Well, what was your experience? You said you had a shared death experience. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Right. So I'd not even heard of a shared death experience when it had happened to me. So it was extremely difficult to understand what was happening when it was happening. But my grandma was 91 years old and she was lying on her deathbed. She had not eaten anything in 10 days and was extremely weak. She had mentioned a couple times before she passed that she was seeing spirits around her. And, we were just like, okay, Nanny, you're dying. So whatever. Nobody took it very seriously. And finally, it was on her 10th day. We kind of knew we were getting close because she started one of those, what they call a death rattle, where their breathing suddenly sounds shaky. And hospice was telling us, you're getting pretty close. So we're all in the room, me, my sister, and my cousin, Maria. and sitting there just sort of chatting quietly. And, I started to notice she was in seemingly distress. Her arms kind of flew up like she was almost like she was traveling somewhere. Now, the next thing I know is my cousin kind of abruptly says, whoa, look at her eyes. And, I stopped what I was doing, looked up, and I noticed her eyes were a different color. She was a green-eyed person. And so it was very odd to see her eyes be sort of like a light turquoisey blue, almost like a Caribbean water blue.
Oh, wow.
Very odd. Very, very odd. And they were seemingly lit somehow, like a very soft light was either emanating from her eyes, or what we all suspect afterwards is we agreed it seemed to be reflected from her eyes somehow, but we couldn't see anything blue.
Mm-hmm.
So we were a little startled. She looked straight up and her eyes were locked on something. And it was also odd, just given she hadn't even opened her eyes in a long time.
Right.
So her eyes were very wide opened, which more wide than you would ever open your eyes unless you were very, very shook or startled.
Mm-hmm.
So she's watching this thing up in the top of the room. My sister and cousin could not move, and after it was all over, they said they felt they could not move. I was compelled to grab my mother and uncle. They were in the kitchen. They're the direct, children of my grandma. So
yeah.
I knew they had to be there. I grabbed them. They come in the room. And the next thing you know, we really start a true shared death experience where I'm at the side of her and the other 4 family members are at the foot of her. And we sensed, and when I say we, I mean 4 of us in the room, sensed an unbelievable energy, and it's indescribable. It was almost as though I was experiencing not only more love and exhilaration than I've ever felt, but it was not my brain even experiencing it. It almost felt like I was using another, and people use the word consciousness, that I was feeling some other consciousness other than my own. It was almost like I had a shared consciousness with the universe. It was bizarre.
Right.
And so I'm feeling this really, and I've used the word crippling because I think it's kind of accurate. Crippling love. It's just so overwhelming. I really fell to my knees. And it might be my Catholic upbringing, but I, kind of started to say a prayer. I didn't know what to do. It was so bizarre.
Right.
And suddenly in my mind, I saw a man in a white robe, and
Really?
he was hovering over my grandmother, and I knew things instantly. I knew he could see everything about her instantly. I knew that she had to go with him, and he was there to collect her. He said, "Come with me." She followed him. We could feel her leaving.
Oh, wow.
And it was incredible. Now, it all happened relatively quickly. I mean, in a matter of a few minutes at the most. My uncle estimates maybe 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It happened very fast. But then after she left, I would pay a lot of money to see us on camera and our reactions because we were just dumbfounded. We didn't know what that was. We didn't know. We had no idea that was even possible. None of us in the room had heard of a shared death experience before.
Right.
And so, my uncle is he's not an idiot. He worked in the Pentagon. He was an attaché for generals. And he was like, in tears, hunched over, like, what was that? And my cousin Maria, she's a yoga instructor, so she thought she was in tune with the universe, but she said, wow, that was different. And my mom and I, we just, I wouldn't say we were lost exactly, but we certainly didn't have any spiritual direction in our lives. And we were like, okay, so something very special happened to Grandma, but we don't know what.
Right.
And so, after we kind of calmed down, we spent the next night having dinner, and we kind of talked about, like, what did we all see? Because we started to realize that we didn't exactly see the same thing. So
Wow.
that was interesting. My sister is a super duper scientifically minded person, and I suspect she felt more than she says, but she claims she didn't have a shared death experience.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't uncommon for someone to have a shared death experience and have difficulty with coming to grips with it or accepting it. And so I still suspect that she may have felt more than she says she did.
Right. And who was the person that actually, broached the topic the next day? I can't imagine that was, a real easy subject to be like, hey, you want to chat about it real quick?
Well, it was odd because we did talk about it immediately, but at the same time, we couldn't gather our thoughts because nobody was thinking straight. Everybody was absolutely confused, energized, giddy. There were these bizarre. It was such a strange mix of emotions. There's really nothing like it. Nothing like it.
Yeah.
And so, by the next evening, we were acting a little more normal, and we went out to a family dinner, and we started to really talk about it. And that was when we realized we did not all experience the same thing. It was really similar, very, very similar, but there's some distinct differences. I was the only person in the room who actually saw a telepathic vision of a light being. However, I don't think I'm crazy because my mother, uncle, and cousin felt him and they knew he was there. They simply couldn't see him.
Wow.
So that was interesting. The other thing that was interesting is my mother and uncle didn't see the light being, but they did see my grandmother moving her shoulders in a rotating fashion as though they were fixed after many years of really awful pain.
Oh,
she had
really?
horrible shoulder pain.
Yeah.
She had her whole life. She had a lot of medical problems throughout her life. She was very young and she had tuberculosis, but she wound up having, I think, both hips replaced, and doctors, when she was in her 70s, had told her it was a good time to get a shoulder replacement, and she refused to do it. Well, by the time she was 91, neither of her shoulders really worked, and she couldn't lift almost anything beyond a partially filled, what do they call a styrofoam cup.
Oh.
That was about all she could lift at the end.
Oh,
to
yeah.
drink.
And there's no way for them to do surgery usually at that point, I've heard, because
they
the
won't do
bones
it.
are like very brittle and whatnot, and it could be far worse for them than if they are just left alone.
Right. So for them to see her rotating her shoulders, she couldn't rotate her shoulders any longer. So for her to do that, they kind of just instinctively knew, oh my God, her shoulders are fixed. Whatever it is, her shoulders are fixed.
Wow.
And then I know that when my mom was cleaning up her body after she died to get prepared for the cremation people who were there to collect her, she noted that her hands were as soft and pliable as a baby's. And it made no sense given the rest of her body was stiff, and her hands were extremely arthritic in her final days, and they were not able to move. She actually had rolled washcloths in her hands as her nails were embedded in her skin, and it was a problem that her hands couldn't open.
Ooh.
So for them to be as soft as a baby was extremely odd. And, my aunt is a nurse practitioner, and she said she's never heard of such a thing. But that was weird. I had I had a notable drop in my heart rate. I have an Apple Watch that checks my heart rate all the time.
Yeah.
And I actually have a vasculitis. And so as a result of having several valves in my legs that are backwards, I've been mapped at Duke for my legs. I have a heart that has to pump extra fast to compensate for my valves. And so my heart rate's always been very poor for my age. I'm only 40, but my heart rate, my resting heart rate before Nanny died was always sitting in the 70s at the very lowest. Even in my deepest sleep, it was in the 70s, which is way too high for my age. And then she died. And I mean, it took me 2 weeks. I really thought I was losing my mind because it just, none of this fit into my belief system. And it was so odd. So 2 weeks after she died, it dawned on me that I felt far less stress, far less anxiety, and it was here to stay. So I checked my heart rate, and I looked at the chart, and I'm like, good Lord, you can see when her near-death experience was on my heart rate monitor. So I literally had a drop of 10 points on average in my heart rate. So now I get scores that I never got before. I even sometimes get as low as in the 40s, although that's not sustained. But I have had much lower numbers coming through on my heart rate. So that's been amazing. I felt less anxiety, and I certainly have this odd sense that I am no longer alone. And I don't know, I don't know if it's my grandmother. I don't know who it is. All I know is I used to feel alone, like anyone feels alone. And I know that sounds weird, but it was a normal sense of being alone. And I no longer feel I'm ever alone. There's something with me all the time wherever I go. And it's a loving, whatever it is very loving. I can feel that, but it's like in me. I feel it. It's somehow, so I don't know what that is.
Right. Yeah. But you unlocked something.
Yeah, I unlocked something, right. And so, I've had a series of very odd synchronicities and things occur ever since. And that, that would take years to go into. But this was the biggest defining moment of my life. And my mother would agree. There's really a before and an after to my life now. And so it's like nothing else.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I actually had, it wasn't a near-death experience, but it was the closest that I could sum up would be I believe I'm a Christian, and so I believe in the Holy Spirit. And I actually had a very unusual experience back when I was, I guess, about 19 or something. And I forgot what the context was, but I was driving my car late at night. I was on the highway coming from Raleigh, and I just felt sort of this overwhelming kind of euphoria just kind of hit me.
Yes.
And then it was like I could feel, it was almost like I was distinct from my body in a weird way. It was almost like I was slightly separate, and I just felt very happy and comfortable. And I was still like able to drive, but I was so
driving.
I was driving. Yeah. So I had to make sure I was like, okay, I can't let go of the steering wheel. But at the same time, I was also sort of like, I don't want to turn or do anything too drastically because I was really worried about losing a connection to whatever it was I was connected to. I still feel it was some sort of a movement of the Holy Spirit in my life, because I can't explain it any other way. And it lasted for about 30 minutes. And it was a wild feeling. And when it was kind of like what you said, when I was done, I got home, I just felt very happy. I felt very like things are going to be okay.
Wow.
So that's
incredible.
Kind of a similar thing, not exactly a near death, but maybe
they
a
call
vibe
it
the wavelength.
Spiritually. they do have a name for that. It's a spiritually transformative experience, including an out of body experience, is what that would be called.
Oh,
and
okay.
That's what we do the group for too. Is I've noticed that many of the people who have attended, most do not have not had a near death experience, and yet when you talk to them, they're almost inevitably someone who's had some sort of spiritually transformative experience that's really changed them, and they need to come for their own processing, for their own understanding. And so I've opened up the talk to that, and I've told people that, you know, we use the title near-death experience because truly that is the experience that is well known. That's the one that, you know, people, you can't mistake that one, you know, but spiritually transformative can be almost anything like what you described, where, you know, you're encountering something of another world that is just, you might be awake, you know, and you may have no way of proving it, that kind of thing, but it doesn't follow that classic tunnel and light story. And yet at the same time, you know, there's elements of it that do have similarities to near-death experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah, because a lot of those stories I have noticed over the years, reading about them and whatnot, it's exactly what you said, that there's something to do with light, walking towards the light, and love, and then it's sort of like the details around that kind of vary from person to person.
Yep.
And that's, I don't know, that's amazing. I find that very comforting. You know, even, you know, I argue with myself constantly, because I'll constantly tell myself, well, it could be, you know, some sort of a release of endorphins in the brain that was triggered by X, Y, and Z. And it's like, I understand the clinical idea behind it, but when you connect it to something as indefinable as, say, like a soul or a spirit, it's like the waters get muddy, and you can't really explain it away with any kind of a very technical definition, because it's like defining it almost neuters it in a way.
Yeah, and they're all so unique and tailored. Yes, I agree 100%. I think there's something about that. And maybe if you know, if God is able, you know, that's why he does that. You know, if that's what it is. That's what it is. You know, that's amazing. I was shocked. I will say, you know, I always was this sort of lapsed Catholic who had a hard time believing that this God that we're presented with knows each of us individually. And I still don't know the answers, but I will say that whoever came to collect my grandmother absolutely knew everything about her.
You're right.
Every little detail. And so, I mean, that must mean something. And I do think that what we do matters. It matters far more than we realize.
Yeah, I do too. And you know, and the thing is, I think a lot of people, I used to overthink it. You know, it would always be I shouldn't do this because that could lead to bad things. And then I came to find out, I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and now I'll take a pill, and I'm like, okay, so now I can kind of chill out a little bit and maybe study, you know, some of the minutia without getting too worried about the fundamental rules and whatnot. You know, it's a spiritual journey, so to speak. So when did you actually start the near-death experience group?
So I started it, what is it, April? I guess we started in February. I've been trying very hard to get us to become affiliated with IANS, which IANS is the International Association for Near-Death Experiences. And they are kind of short-staffed right now, so they told me they've apologized, but they haven't gotten around to looking at our group yet. But that is the goal, is to associate with them, because they are a research arm, and they do publish materials. And it makes me feel comfortable knowing that we would somehow be validated by science, that this is it. We can't prove it necessarily, but, you know, thousands, if not millions of accounts must stand for something.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
And the similarities, the commonalities, and the one thing they absolutely can't seem to explain are these after effects. You know, Dr. Grayson, in his book I just shared with my group, he mentions that as a psychiatrist, he has seen how difficult it is to get people to make very minute changes in their life, and how many years of therapy that takes. You know, that's a lot of work for both the patient and the therapist. And he said he knew something was different about near-death experiences, because he himself was not a near-death experiencer, but he knew something was off when his patients were making huge, major life changes within a matter of, you know, minutes of their experience. They were very changed, right? So that was kind of, for him, a big signal that there's something real here. And so, yeah, I mean, he also has a large section of the book, especially towards the back, where he examines the brain itself. And he has studied every single theory that exists that that has been attempted to explain why the brain would have a near-death experience. And he kind of says none of them do a thorough job. None of them have proven that they haven't proven that they cause a near-death experience, or the brain does something to cause a near-death experience. Certainly doesn't explain a shared death experience. And so he talks about how, when people have no problem believing when we say, dogs can smell things we can't smell, or certain animals can see things we can't see in the dark or whatnot, right? Because our eyes and our ears are essentially a type of filter for survival. And he argues that the human brain is also a filter just like the other senses. And the brain filters out only what it needs for survival. But in fact, there are things going on around us that we cannot see. And this was absolutely, a big moment for me to read that and aha, like I never thought of it that way before. And, why is it that people accept the fact that we have filters in our eyes and our ears, but we stop and say, oh no, we as humans must know everything there is to know because we're the smartest beings ever, so
yeah.
we seem to have this like idea that if you can't prove it, it's not real, but there's a chance that there's things going on around us that we just can't study because we have that filter up. Now, he argues that the reason he thinks this at all is because when people have near-death experiences, their brain is losing function, not gaining it. So the filter, the brain as a filter, loses its ability to filter. And so that would explain why people in their final moments have that terminal lucidity.
Oh.
It still doesn't explain why shared death experiences happen.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, just the story that you told me, I have never heard of that before, and I had no idea that people had shared that before. I've always been under the impression a near-death experience was generally from the person experiencing it. So I'm completely fascinated with that.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, it's interesting being an experiencer or not, but I kind of suspect that there's a shared consciousness that we join, and to me, that doesn't have to be anti anything. I was raised Catholic, but there's nothing wrong with thinking that our form of heaven might be a shared consciousness. And it's a loving shared consciousness, but it could fit. It doesn't have to not fit. But that could fit several religions, honestly.
Yeah. That would go across quite a few doctrines, I believe.
Right. So, I mean, my theory is that you join some sort of shared consciousness, and whatever being I saw somehow radiates this consciousness, and that being in the presence of it allowed me to experience it ever so briefly, even though I myself was not sick. It must be very powerful for it to I mean, this is all in theory, but to overwhelm my actively working brain that was not in any way impaired.
Yeah.
So whatever it was extraordinarily powerful.
Right.
And it's interesting that I'm saying that now because I'm kind of putting two and two together. And my mother's first reaction after it occurred was, I feel like Nanny saw it, face to face, but we somehow saw it through a filter. So those were her exact words. I remember her saying that. So I'm like, okay, now I'm wondering if that really was it. Is that we sensed it even though our filters were up and running? I mean, I don't know. I'm just, but yeah, it's anyone's guess at this point.
Well, I don't think that there is enough time in the human span of a human's lifetime. I don't think there's enough time to process something like that. I think that's something that you're always going to wrestle with because it's like you said, there's no way to prove it. and yet
Yeah.
you know it to be real. It's interesting how much we rely on our own personal experiences to inform others of things that you believe to be true. And it's hard to convince people sometimes if they're not already kind of predisposed to thinking that. It's really hard to explain to them why you believe that and why you think that and why you feel this. And I'm glad that this is out there. That's why I was so glad to see that there was a group like this, because near-death experiences are really, for me, kind of relegated to old Unsolved Mysteries episodes. That was about my experience with it, So to hear, people around here literally opening up and sharing makes me think there's a lot more of this out there than probably a lot of people are even recognizing. So it's nice that they have a forum like the Near-Death Experience group you run for them to go to if they feel like it's somewhere where they can talk about this.
Right. And the experiencers typically go because they are having a little trouble processing it. You go to a therapist and you tell them this stuff and they might think you're crazy. Depending on how you respond and depending on who you go to. So it is a safe place, and I encourage, and I still encourage people to definitely share any kind of spiritually transformative experience that you feel may have any related elements to that sort of shared death or near-death experience, because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, we've had people who came and, they said, well, we didn't have a shared death or anything, but a week after my husband died, I had a dream and I just know it was real. And, there were certain things, someone mentioned the other day, they said that their husband had died and they asked him for a sign. And in the dream, he presented something that only she would know as a sign. And it was a silver dollar of some sort. And I forget the personal story behind it. But she woke up and she just knew he visited her. She just knew it. And just amazing stories people tell you. It's incredible that this is not more well known, that there's not more acceptance. But again, you're up against a lot of elements. It doesn't fit into a lot of our narratives. Even if you aren't of any religious background or any science background of any kind, it still doesn't fit daily life well. It just doesn't. Even my own, I can't replicate it. I can't replicate the feeling that I had, which is very odd. And that to me proves that I was not even using my brain in the moments that my shared death experience occurred. But it is nonetheless life-changing. And I just want someone to talk to, and so does everyone else. I mean, everyone else who goes to these experiences, they just want someone to talk to. And so they don't want to feel like they're crazy. And that's totally
and have a
normal.
shared commonality with the idea that you've all experienced this. That's always good to find,
right?
Your tribe who've also had the same experience, because it just makes it so much easier when there is somebody there that understands.
Yes, and we come from all backgrounds and everything, so it was a very mixed group last month, and we had some people return, and it's a very good mixed group this month. But I think, just sort of to sum it up, it can be anyone who has these experiences. And it's just, we try to make it accessible. It's just at a public library so you can feel safe, So, yeah. Now, it's a great group.
Now, are people, is it starting to get out there? Is the word seemingly is it catching on with people? Are you seeing people coming and talking to you more about this?
Well, we had 9 people on Monday, which was a good show. And I think we had 8 on our first meeting. So it's a good starting group number. I'd like to include more and more. And I've got some people on the group who are interested in us starting a Facebook page. I have a meetup page. I've paid for the year subscription, so we've got that up and running. And I've been putting flyers around town. I mean, we put it in the Starbucks and in the local libraries and such. So we're trying. we just need people to keep coming. And I have a feeling at some point we're going to have to start appointing speakers. We're not there yet, but once we get to a point where we probably have enough people, maybe 15 or so, we need to start getting serious about having a speaker. But for now, it's just getting up and running and just kind of seeing if anyone has a story to tell for now, and then going from there. But yeah, no, if we get to that point where we need a speaker, we may need to alternate having peer support with speaker nights or something, just so that it's sort of a combination of both. But I mean, we have people who want to speak who are locals right here. And there's nothing wrong with just kind of handing them the mic for the evening. And for many people, just answering questions about their experience is therapeutic for them, So
I'm sure
that's kind of where we were headed anyways. But yeah, it's a great group. It's a good group.
And that's so great because, you've only been in action since February and you're closing in on 10 people. That's actually pretty surprising. Usually a group, any kind of a new group that is just starting out, it's usually a small little group that, like that core group that hangs out about 5 people for, like a year before it really starts growing. So that's really good.
Yeah, we did have 30 people sign up on Meetup. They just haven't shown, but it's hopefully going to spread. There is a Death Cafe group in Greensboro, I believe, and they're fairly large, and so some of their people have started to sign up. But Death Cafe isn't quite as definitive as we are. They're more or less sort of open to talking about death in general and accepting death, that sort of thing. We're more like the detailed experiences that have occurred.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Those are two very distinct things. And oh, bless you. Yeah. Those are very, very distinct because I could see enjoying a group where you're talking about death and the acceptance of death. It's something that we all struggle with, but that's not real comforting. It's more it's in a weird way. It's like talking about when your computer is about to crash or your dog is going to die. It's like, yeah, okay. It's going to suck. I don't really want to think about it right now.
Yeah, exactly. So, right. Hopefully it spreads. Asheville has a IONS group, affiliated group, and Raleigh and Durham both have IONS affiliated groups. I felt Greensboro could desperately need one. We have a very large population in the Triad, and people need a place to go without having to drive all the way out to Raleigh or Asheville.
Yeah. It's a lot easier if you can go, like for me, it would be 30 minutes down the road versus 2 hours and 30 minutes down the road. So yeah, I completely agree. Well, tell everybody, where exactly where you guys meet, when you meet, all of the information that they need to find out what they need to know about the Near Death Experience group.
Right. So I have a Meetup page. It's open to the public. And for the Greensboro Near Death Experience group is the exact title. And I post when we have meetings. I'm due to post another one. We are going to be meeting in May on, I believe it's the 4th week, but don't quote me on that. Check our Meetup page. And it is in the evenings on a Monday evening. We're trying to aim for 6:30 p.m. That seems to work for people. And then it's typically a 2-hour meeting, although both times that we've had a meeting so far, we have stayed as long as possible until the library was literally kicking us out. But it is a 2-hour meeting at Kathleen Clay Edwards Branch Library in Greensboro. And yeah, no, that's really kind of all you need to know. And we have had only a couple people have shown up who were simply interested but didn't have anything to add. But yeah, anyone is welcome to come. Some people are just there because they're interested. Most people who attend feel that something personal has brought them there. And it's similar to what your experience was. Something spiritually transformative has made them feel compelled to come. So it's an interesting mix of people.
Well, that's great too, because, what's good about something like this is it's very much across all religions, like you said earlier before. No one will probably feel excluded due to their experience, and being able to share from the perspective of a different religion and whatnot, I'm sure is really educational and great. Right.
It is, and that's part of the IANS rules. We're trying to follow IANS rules because we're trying to seek affiliation. So part of their rules are, being open-minded, allowing everyone to share their experience in full without the judgment that goes with it. Just sort of accepting and understanding that, each of our experiences is almost like an opinion in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So you treat it that way, and you certainly don't argue with someone's experience. That's theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So we follow those rules. We go over that briefly at the start of the meeting just to make sure everybody feels comfortable sharing.
Right. Well, good. That's, because I know a lot of the times when people are starting in a new group like that, if they're attending a new group, there's always that apprehension of, all right, I'm the new guy. I don't know my way around this place. I don't know what they're expecting. So, the more open, the better for so many of these groups. And I've been to plenty of groups where you can kind of feel the cliquishness involved, and that's an immediate turnoff. So I think you guys are saying, no, you're absolutely open here, and you're absolutely welcome. That has got to just, hopefully that will lead to success. I don't see how it couldn't.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think so too.
So that's going to do it for this episode of the Piedmont Triad Podcast. Make sure you go and check out the Greensboro Near Death Experience social media websites. Also, make sure to go to meetup.com and search for the Greensboro Near Death Experience group. Again, they meet monthly at the Kathleen Clay Edwards Public Library in Greensboro, North Carolina. Also, make sure you go to the PiedmontTriadPodcast.com for all of the episodes and the links to all of our social media outlets. And again, a big thanks to Matt Smith and the Cowboy Spankers for our theme song called Not Tonight. Make sure to check out their Bandcamp page under Matt Smith and the Cowboy Spankers. Also, a big thanks to my friend Brian Falk for all of the fantastic artwork that you see on the Piedmont Triad Podcast website. And a big thanks to you for listening. Until next time, Piedmont.
Maybe I should keep on moving. You're like the devil when the sun goes down. Stay away from me. Well, I'm too far gone. There ain't nothing here to see, babe. So you best just move along.